Well, I'm very excited that I'm joined today by Henry Skinner, who you will have seen from today's newsletter was just announced as the CEO of the new AMR Action Fund. Henry, it's great to see you again because I think you and I met a few years ago when you were at the Novartis Venture Fund, as I recall.
I think it actually was long before that, John. I think if I remember right, you were at AstraZeneca and we had a relationship at Neogenesis doing screening. So I hate to bring us both back that far in time, but
God, it's a small world. So the AMR Action Fund, um, I guess let's just kind of start at the beginning a little bit. Tell us a little bit about you and what got you interested in the AMR Action Fund. Let's just sort of start with the basics. Introduce yourself.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks, John. So my background going way back is in as a microbiologist. That's my formal training. And I've had an interest in antibiotics going back to my undergraduate days when Lyme disease was becoming known in the Northeast, and I developed an antibody to it and had thoughts of an assay, a diagnostic, and the like. So I had a long-standing interest in it. I think a combination of the microbiology and the history and what microorganisms have done throughout humanity in really dramatic ways. If you think back through history, the impact it's had, maybe not appreciated at the time, but really significant changes to the history of mankind. And that sparked an interest that led to my PhD in microbiology. And from there, I went off and did a postdoc at Baylor College of Medicine and had a chance to work in biotech and pharma for the last 25 years. At Pharmacia, I supported all the therapeutic areas, but was enamored with infectious disease. I did in-licensing of some antibiotic compounds out of Japan. And at the time, we were developing Zyvox, which was one of the first novel antibiotics or new mechanisms that had come out in a very long time. So I grew an appreciation, understanding of discovery and development of antibiotics through that. I ran a company for a couple of years trying to develop new antibiotics, new aminoglycosides, by pulling them out of the environment and expressing them and looking for opportunities to really impact drug-resistant gram-negative bacteria, hopefully in a safer way. So I did that for a while. And in the last 15 years, I've been doing investing, invested in antibiotic companies in that time, which has been very, very difficult. And I'm sure we'll talk more about, but really appreciate the challenge of this, not just scientifically, but commercially, and from an investment standpoint, to really drive and take advantage of the innovation that's happening across indications and well beyond anti-infectives. And it's just been a challenge to finance the innovation in the anti-infective space. So I couldn't be more thrilled that the AMR Action Fund was put together. Really a fantastic private-public consortium to put significant funds to work to bridge this gap while we develop the right policies to reinvigorate a market-based situation for the innovation in this space.
Wow. So from a serodiagnostic test for Lyme disease to 15 years as an investment manager in across pharma, now to here. Tell me a little bit more about what you did during your 15 years of doing investing, because I think I feel like that's got to be a real source of insight for you about how to move the AMR Action Fund forward. But just, where did you work and roughly what sorts of things were you doing?
Oh, absolutely. So I was doing business development for Novartis. And about 15 years ago, I had an opportunity to join their venture fund. Really a unique environment. It was a non-strategic fund, so focused on really advancing innovation for patient benefit. I spent 15 years there. I invested across therapeutic areas, neuroscience, oncology, inflammation, et cetera. As well as a couple of anti-infective companies, antifungal we invested in, as well as antibacterial, really focused on the patient need first and foremost, and solid science and teams behind it to try to advance that innovation. So throughout that time, I've probably invested several $100 million, and with others, probably north of $1 billion or two, in advancing these really phenomenal technologies and the innovation we've all seen over the past couple of decades. And it's impressive how it accelerates year after year. So that certainly gave me insight in what it takes to build a company in this environment, to finance it, to conduct rigorous research, preclinical work leading to clinical development, and ultimately, approval for patient benefit across indications. And what it takes at the board level, what it takes to bring co-investors in, and so forth. But I think the fabulous thing for what we do is that we can really focus on significant patient benefit, and there's so much opportunity for us to make a difference in this world. And that's where I spent the last the 10 years or so at the Novartis Venture Fund. And then for the last few years, I've been at an investment group called Tekla Capital Management, which focuses more on late stage investing, which has been a phenomenal time as we look at the IPO market and the public markets, really appreciating the patient benefit we bring in the industry with the innovation. And through that, I've also developed a sense of what it takes to mature a company toward a commercial company, which has been a nice complement to my scientific upbringing as a PhD and building biotech companies from the ground up.
Yeah. So it's clearly a very natural fit, I would say, in the sense AMR Action Fund focused on late stage stuff, but they lured you out of doing that to run this fund. What made you jump?
I think that's a pretty easy one. I have to say, it feels as if it was developed for me rather than the other way around. But again, there's such a need here and such a challenge in the environment to advance this. And I've experienced it firsthand in my investing in anti-infective companies over the last 15 years. It has been an increasing struggle to bring capital to it, even though the amount of capital available in both the private and public markets has grown phenomenally over the past 2 decades. It just hasn't been distributed to anti-infectives as you would think it would, based on the clinical need, which is only increasing. To great effect in other indications, which is fantastic. But I think we've suffered from some macroeconomic constraints to the marketplace for antibacterials, particularly, that has really been an impediment to the natural flow of market capital to take advantage of the innovation we've seen in other areas. So I think the need is so great, and what has been put together, the AMR Action Fund with the public-private consortia, a mix of pharma from around the world, and now joined by fantastic nonprofit organizations, is just the right thing at the right time to bridge the gap. We need these new antibiotics to drug-resistant bacteria now, as you well know. And it's going to take time to change the policies to recreate or to reinvigorate the market in this indication. So the fund's in a perfect place to really advance it and to complement the work that's been done by CARB-X and other groups to advance the early stage of the pipeline. And now we need to move it forward and get approvals. And our goal is to advance 2 to 4 new antibiotics to patients in the next, by the end of the decade, which is a bit ambitious, but absolutely doable. And hopefully in that time, we've worked to help invigorate new policies that make this sustainable in a market-driven way.
Yeah, it's that latter part that I think is such an interesting opportunity. The advancing the compounds, in a sense, I'd say, not that it's easy, but we sort of know how to do that. If you find an interesting compound, the phase 2, phase 3 is reasonably well defined. But it's this opportunity. I've thought, as I heard about the AMR Action Fund, that the advancing the products to 2030 was one thing, but the really big thing was to use this as a bully pulpit to drive the process of going from having pull incentives, such as CARB-X and Novo Repair and now AMR Action Fund, push incentives, excuse me, to having serious global pull incentives. And, how do you see all that coming together?
I think it's going to be a challenge. I think, but you're right. There's no question there's a need there, and we'll certainly be active in calling attention to just how significant that need is. But even today, we have 700,000 people dying around the world from drug-resistant infections on an annual basis, and that may grow to 10 million by 2050. So this is a slow-burning pandemic that we really have to deal with and stay in front of. As we've known since penicillin came out in the 40s, that drug resistance was going to be a problem, and we just haven't continued the innovation over the last 20 or 30 years to stay ahead of it, and we need to do that. So we'll be certainly drawing attention to that and working with the Wellcome Trust and others to build a consensus and appreciation for what needs to happen. And I'm optimistic I don't think there's any doubt that the need is there. And it's just a question of how the policymakers find solutions that will enable this. But we can take advantage of the innovation, and we will bridge the gap and certainly draw attention to it going forward.
Yeah, it seems like it's a real opportunity for health policy innovation. And it's been interesting to see what NICE and what the UK and NICE have been doing in terms of thinking about the ways to talk about drug value in a way that we've never talked about it before. It's just a red hot moment of awareness because of COVID, if nothing else, that we actually could take some concrete steps that would make a difference.
And I think we will. I think the chief thing is we recognize the problem. It's getting worse as we look at the trends with drug-resistant bacteria, and you can pick almost any of them. They all trend up, right? It doesn't drop back down, and so we need to stay ahead of it, and we'll do that. I'm optimistic that there'll be solutions. So there's a number that are being talked about that I think get us a ways there, and we certainly will work with interested parties to help bring those forward.
Well, great. I am just delighted to see the Action Fund coming together. I think it's fantastic that a senior microbiologist investor is going to take it and run it. And I realize it's early days. You were just announced in the role, so I get it. There's probably a lot to be formed up. But do you have any sort of immediate thoughts for what all of us in the community can expect to have happen over the next 6 months? And while I'm at it, I'm going to say, you're going to have to come back and talk some more here in a couple of months when you know more of these answers. But is there anything you want to say today about it?
Well, John, thanks for that invitation. I'll certainly take you up on it and come back in a month or 6 weeks and tell you how we're doing. But this problem is urgent. I'm anxious to hit the ground running and really build out this organization. So I would expect in the second quarter, we'll start reviewing opportunities and making investments, not too long after that, I would hope. And there's a lot of work to do to build out the team and to advance it. And I think we will continue to raise money as well. We have significant capital to put forward, and we'll look to invest $1 billion to bring forward these 2 to 4 new antibiotics. But there's more to be done. So yeah, I think we'll be hitting the ground running, and you'll hear a lot from us in the coming quarters and certainly by the end of the year. But I think we'll be earnestly starting not too far from now. The second quarter is only a month away.
Second quarter 2021. So who knows? Maybe you'll have something invested, have some stuff done by the end of the year. I mean, that could be interesting to see whether it could move that rapidly. That's possible.
I think we will. Again, the problem is urgent, so I don't think there's any time to waste, and we'll build the cars and we're moving forward.
Super. Well, thanks again for making time to chat, and thanks, the big thank you from the whole community for taking this on. Marvelous to see it come to fruition. Fabulous to see that, today that we learned that Wellcome and the European Investment Bank are putting in some more money, Boehringer Ingelheim. It's all coming together to have the money for you to make this into a smashing success so that we have the drugs when we want them tomorrow. So Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks very much, John. We'll talk soon.
What fun to have Henry today to talk to us about the AMR Action Fund and to have a dyed-in-the-wool microbiologist who also knows investment leading that activity. Wonderful stuff. And if you want to learn more about it, click the link below to go to the newsletter about today's announcement. And as always, like, comment, and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.